the Buddha, he said, look, don't believe anything that I say. Test it for yourself. And that's the same thing with Patanjali. You test it for yourself. And at the end of the day, you find that it's a codification he didn't invent it. All he did was codified it, of the very essence of what the practice is. But logic, the logical side of it is good and it's bad, because you need the logic to try to challenge it. But if you are too rigid in your logic, that stops you from moving out from the logic. And that's the difficulty, because you want to challenge it, but you need to do it in a way that you are totally open about it, and not that you're ticking boxes. You understand what I mean? By ticking boxes means that if you take it from a purely logical perspective, you're trying to reinforce your own attitudes. So when you, not specifically about this, but about life in general, so what happens is we reinforce our biases. So something either something that we hear or that we say kind of confirms that bias, in which case, great, or it doesn't, in which case we reject it. But it's all from a position of our own biases. The practice is about taking away those biases and saying, look, anything's possible. Just because I see it that way doesn't mean that it is that way. There may be a whole variety of solutions. I'm just talking generally at the moment and see what comes in. Hi, guys. Hi. There may be a whole... what we find is, rather than there are yes or no solutions to it, that there's a whole range of... It's all possibilities. Anything is possible. When we realise that anything is possible, and we apply logic to that, then we really start moving somewhere, because we're analytical, but not in a rigid way. And that is how we need to approach any practice, whether it's this or anything. And Patanjali, he put it in a really, really simple way. That's why what Patanjali actually wrote is very, very short. The analyses of it are sometimes very long. And there are many people that have done it. Vivekananda did it. That's what I was introduced to. Vivekananda lived at the latter part of the 19th century. And there are several people that have written commentary. And it's good to look at those that are more contemporary, because it makes it that much easier. It takes away part of the barrier. So you've been struggling with that then?
No, I haven't been struggling. It came to me at a nice time, whereby I'm open and receptive to it, and aware that my intellect gets in the way of my progress sometimes. So I'm quite intellectual, so for me it's a really good thing because I just accepted that that's the case. And just like, okay, these guys have vast experience compared to I've seen the benefits from taking some of what they say, so full surrender, let's go.
Well, you're an ideal candidate then, I must tell you, because that's a great attitude to bring to the practice. The intellect is, there's Jnana Yoga, which is about wisdom, which is the intellectual aspect of it. And it is important. But the openness of it is what's important, that we are... all the practice does is, any practice is what it's supposed to do, is to take away the rigidity of mind and open it to possibilities. Because if we don't open our minds to possibilities, then we're actually rejecting a whole range. We're rejecting a whole range of things that we should be taking into account. So we're always seeing things from not a very objective perspective. Hi. Lots of new faces today. I'd like to just find out before we start who's got what experience. I know you, so I know where you are. How about you? What sort of experience have you got yoga-wise?
Yoga-wise,
Meditation.
yoga-wise I'm probably a beginner. I like yin yoga, it's good for my mind. Meditation, I've gone to quite a few meditation classes, like in the UK. I'm a Reiki master, so I do quite a lot of meditation as part of the Reiki. Yeah, so I've got a little bit.
Do you meditate regularly?
I do.
Good.
I tried different types of meditation. So I did a Buddhist course in it, 6-week Buddhist course in it, and I actually found that the hardest because that was all about.
Really?
Yeah, because it was all to do with.
What did you find difficult about it?
Well, the course I attended was all about clearing the mind, and it was quite big. This was about 5-6 years ago, and it was quite lengthy sessions, like 45 minutes to an hour.
Who was it with?
It was out in Maidenhead, West London.
But was it a group?
It was a group, yeah, it was a group, and I wasn't as far on my journey back then, so I found it really difficult to sit there for 45 minutes and not think of anything.
Yeah, well, most people would.
And people tell you all this stuff like, imagine it's a cloud, let it float in and float out, but 45 minutes back then was like a long time. But I've tried a few different types of meditation.
Well, we teach something a little different because the fact of the matter is the mind does not actually have the capacity of just blanking out. That's why people have this idea that it's about just kind of blissing out and you go to some place and there's no one at home. And that's not at all what meditation is. Meditation is quite the opposite. The mind is always there. It's just that it is single-pointed. In other words, it's not distracted by things that are going on in our lives, our ego mind, monkey mind in Buddhism, right? So but when we get beyond the monkey mind, that doesn't mean that there's nobody at home, right? It's not that at all. It enables us. In fact, I practice Tibetan Buddhism. This book, if you're talking about Buddhist meditation, that's probably the best one there is on the subject. Kathleen MacDonald,
I've heard of her.
right? She's a nun, and this book explains the Buddhist, very simple aspect of Tibetan Buddhist meditation. There are some fundamental things that are important about some principles that you need to get to understand, like non-attachment, impermanence, certain concepts that are very, very important. And this book actually deals with it, and we deal with most of them in one form or another here. Hi.
Hi, how are you? I'm Rochelle.
Hi, Rochelle. Tell me something, have you got some background in this?
I've done yoga, bits and pieces of the different strains of it. So I would say it's a little bit of a hodgepodge. I wouldn't say I'm a student of any one particular strain. Meditation for me has been a little bit of a struggle to get there. So
Why did you find it a struggle?
just being able to quiet my mind.
Yeah.
I guess I think after a little while I would get a little bit antsy. But yeah.
But how long were you meditating?
I would say purely for about 10 minutes before I would have to start pulling the thoughts back, so, yeah.
Well, we're going to teach you, I'm going to teach you a very simple way. There actually, there's a lot of mumbo-jumbo about meditation, and it's actually a very, very simple thing. And it's not a thing that one needs to do for too long. The worst is to try to force oneself beyond one's time, like what you're describing, because then it starts not becoming a pleasant sensation. And the object of the whole practice is that it's always pleasurable. If it ceases to be pleasurable, you're not going to do it. So you have to build up a practice that is pleasurable for you. Everybody's practice needs to be a little different. And that we don't overdo it, so that it doesn't mean that doing double gives you twice the effect in Buddhism, in yoga or Buddhism, in any of these things. It's not like that. The most important thing is that you get the right method, that you understand the method. What I teach is very simple, very modern, very short. It's for people who live normal lives, that you can fit it in, right? You don't have to go off up a mountain, you don't have to spend 2 hours a day doing it. It's quick, but effective. So what I'm saying is that the most important thing is that it's done effectively. There is a very, very specific technique attached to it. And if you understand those principles, you don't have to do a lot of it. The only thing you really need to do is do it every day, ideally twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And the whole thing is about 20 minutes. And you can do the whole thing, right? And it's all about, you get rid of, we all have habits, bad habits. We want to reduce those bad habits. We want to increase our bad habits because we are by nature habitual. We are creatures of habit. So we have to take that on board. And so what we have to do is to try to improve our habits. And that doesn't just mean drinking, smoking, or anything like that. That means the way we think, our mind processes as well, right? So that we get into bad, negative habits. These are the things that lead us into anxiety and depression, because depression's about the past, anxiety's about the future. And if we start getting onto that sort of thing and we allow our minds to go that way, those are bad habits. And I say they're habits because they are. The point about a practice is that we get in control of our mind, not allow our mind to be in control of us. And that's what the whole thing is about. It's actually gaining control over it, watching it, being able to observe it. I know about you, Vicky. Sorry, what's your background?
Are you looking at me?
Yes.
Oh, my background?
Yes.
Well, I would love to meditate. I would love to have the discipline to meditate every day. I've done 2 of your sessions, and I love that idea. I have practiced it a few times on my own. Each time I've done it, it's been wonderful. My day has been better. So don't ask me why I don't do it every day, because I don't know.
Well, you should meditate on that one.
I think I will. I think I will. Thank you.
And the young lady at the back?
Well, I was introduced to meditation in 2011 and have participated in several courses with someone named Kambiz Nafise, who has the Joy of Life organization. And I've attended his workshops in Sweden and Geneva and Amsterdam. And my husband has attended as well. So he uses a lot of Kriya Yoga, but he has a guided meditation process as well. For me and for us, the effects were almost immediate, and it was obvious that it was a good thing to do. And it's been very beneficial, but I guess like you, some days I'm like, well, why didn't I meditate? I brush my teeth on a regular basis,
Wow.
why can't I do this? But of course, when I do, it's everything is better, and our whole family listens to a guided meditation at night when we go to sleep, including my daughter. So we're all a little bit hooked on it, but we just need to probably do it on a more mindful basis during the day. Although sometimes in the grocery line or in the car, I practice ujjayi breathing and thinking.
It's interesting, one of the things you said about practicing it during the day, because it's one of the things I'm going to talk about, which is meditation in action, which is about doing it during the day. But the most important thing with any of these practices is to do it on a regular basis, because meditation is not there really. Yeah, it'll make you feel better. You sit down and you kind of escape for a while, but it's a cumulative thing, and you really, the only commitment you need to make is a little bit of time, every day. Now that doesn't mean that one needs to be fanatical about it. You shouldn't be, because then that's also not what you're supposed to do. You should, so for example, if you lead a busy life, say you travel, and one day you can't do it, doesn't matter, right? You shouldn't start getting worried that you haven't done it, but get back to it the following day, because if we start, that can become a habit as well, of not doing it. So we say, all right, well, tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and we're out of it. The important thing, the most important thing, is to do it on a regular basis, daily, right? And I know we spoke briefly at the beginning. What background do you have?
Me?
Yes.
Well, I was in a yoga school when I was quite young, around 13, because my mother was a yoga instructor, but I didn't have so much experience after that until recently, the last year, I would say. I got a very big interest, and I met some interesting people who have taught me parts along the way, and yeah, so now I'm quite looking for learning more about it and understanding more.
Okay. Have any of you had any pranayama experience? Pranayama? Yeah? You? I know you have. Anyone else? Pranayama? Nobody seems to be very sure of that. Okay. Does everybody know what pranayama is? We all know, right? Never. One thing with this is, if you don't know, always ask, because otherwise you never know. It doesn't make one look silly or anything like that. It's really important that if you don't understand something, you ask, put up your hand, I'll try and answer it, and that you understand the different concepts. So that I'm taking it then that everybody understands what pranayama at least is. Yes? No.
No.
Pranayama is, prana is energy, right? It is, it is energy. And yama is the control of energy through the breath, okay? And it is let me put it to you this way. Patanjali wrote what is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga has a component of it that involves the control of the breath. The reason that it is important is that the breath is the only thing that works on its own, but that you can also control. So it's a gateway, right? In other words, the breath, if you're not conscious of your breath, you're still going to keep breathing. But you also have the ability to control your breath. So it's like a reverse engineering situation. You use that, the ability to control your breath, to reverse all the other aspects of it. It'll calm you down, and I'll go into it in a moment as to how it's done. But it energizes one, and it energizes one's system. Now, it is to do, I will show you how in a moment, but it is to do with the fact that we are charging our bodies and our minds with energy, and in doing so we are bringing energy through the breath into our body, and we are, imagine, we've all done it at school, the iron filings with a magnet, yeah? We all know what that is, don't we? You know what I mean? Where you've got these iron filings all scattered and you put a magnet and suddenly it's all in a pattern. Well, that's what pranayama does to one's energy. It focuses it. It draws it into a certain framework, right? And so it harnesses it. Let's put it that way. The breath, normally we breathe in a very subdued, kind of way. We tend to breathe from here, and it's a low kind of breath. With pranayama, we do a much larger breath, and it is focused. It's a very precise thing as to how it's done, and the result of it is that we take in approximately 7 times the amount of breath that we otherwise would. It's a very large breath, and it's done in a particular way, which has the effect of energizing us, right? And it needs to be done in the right way. And there is a very, you have to start somewhere, but it's a very slow and gradual process to build up the practice of pranayama. It's something that, it depends how quickly you want to develop your practice. If it is that you're really happy just doing a bit of meditation and meditating on different things, you can do that. It depends on what your goal is. If you just want to relax and that's the purpose, then perhaps if you don't like pranayama, it doesn't mean it hinders your meditation, but what it will do, they say that, to put it into context, that if you do pranayama, it accelerates the process 10,000 times. That's the effect of pranayama as part of a practice. So I'm saying you can do a practice that's a lightweight practice and get enjoyment out of it. If you're looking for great gain, great spiritual gain or anything like that, if you are on the path where you say, look, I want to get enlightened in this lifetime, which is a Buddhist, that is the highest aspiration, then you will only be able to achieve that involving some form of breath control. Right? There is no other way, because the breath control is required to accelerate the process, to bring one to enlightenment in this lifetime. And there is no other way. The other ones will take you some of the way, and then next lifetime, if you believe in rebirth, you'll have another go at it and hopefully move forward. Right? So we've got the pranayama, the meditation. We do a very simple meditation here. And because meditation is simple. Now, because we all come from different backgrounds of meditation here, and I apologize to those that have heard this before, but let me just break here. The difficulty I have with the classes is there are a range of levels. And when I have people that I have not met before, I have to make the assumption that I can only go to a certain level in the teaching that I give. That's why it was important to me to talk to you. One of the things we've been considering, Julian and I have been talking about it, is to divide the classes in future, so that those that want to have a more dynamic class can join it. It would be a smaller group, 5 or 6, but it would be a much more dynamic kind of class. And if there are, because the problem that I have with this is that we've been getting a lot of people coming, but what I don't want to do is to lose the people that really want to move on because they think that it's not moving anywhere. So I'd like, ideally, to address both of those situations. So we're trying to put together a group, a small group, that would like a much more robust practice and have the background to be able to sustain it. All right? Now, having said that, let's just get back to the meditation. The practice of meditation is actually not that difficult. You mentioned before about the clouds, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to use that one because it's a good one. Mm-hmm. If you imagine the sky full of clouds, you've never seen anything other than the clouds, and they're moving around, different colours. And then one day you see a glint of the sun opening, coming through a slight opening in the clouds. And bit by bit, the clouds open, and then they close a bit, and open, and then they open a bit more, and so on and so forth. Now, that is how our mind works. In other words, the analogy is the sun is our unconscious mind. That is what we all see, and we all see it exactly the same way, and it's stable, and it's there all the time. It is unbounded. There's nothing you can say about it other than it's up there and it's always the same. You can forget that there's night and day, but I mean, that is what it represents. It's always the same. The clouds represent our thoughts, right? And so what happens is that if we are in an environment where we've never seen the sun, we think that we are our thoughts, okay? We go from thought to thought to thought to thought. There are those thoughts that we find pleasant, to which we are attracted, and there are those thoughts that we find unpleasant, that we are repelled from, or repelled by. But we always have a reaction to those thoughts, and this is going on all the time. So it may be something mundane, in which case we are it's judgment. We are judging it, yes or no or whatever. And if it is something that is really meaningful to us, to do with a relationship or something like that, where it's really heavy duty, our emotions are heightened. So there are differing degrees to which we react, but we're always reacting. Everybody does it. Now, meditation practice is about being introduced to that space that is the sun, and enabling us to view our thoughts. In other words, we then see that we are not our thoughts, right? The mere fact that we are the observer of those thoughts means that we cannot be those thoughts, because otherwise, how can we observe them? There wouldn't be an observer. We couldn't get beyond them. But the fact of the matter is, we are constantly thinking. Now, that space of the sun is, if you like, the space of enlightenment. It's the samadhi mind. It is the mind that is always silent, always steady, and that is where we want to go. It's like a compass. That's where we want to go. So the meditation, the introduction to meditation in whatever form, should introduce us to that, so that we very quickly learn that we are not our thoughts. So then who are we? And that is a very important meditation, particularly Buddhist meditation. In fact, it's both. It's a yogic and a Buddhist meditation as to who we really are. There is a meditation, in fact, in this book, about who am I? Where does the I reside? The I, me, where is it? And when you actually go through the whole thing and you look at does the I reside in my brain? Does the I reside in my heart? Where does the I reside? You come to the conclusion that there is no I. Right? So we are actually we are an energetic field that is based on a silent state, if you like, and all our emotions that arise come out of this. You may have heard of Shiva and Shakti, two aspects, right? Now, Shiva is that space, that continuous base, that silent, infinite space, field, of which prana, that's what prana is in its raw state. And it's infinite, and the whole universe is made of it. All animals, all plants, mountains, everything are made of it. What is it? It's an energetic field that can be stimulated through Shakti, because Shakti is the energetic aspect of that conscious mind. In other words, that space is activated by energy to perform in certain ways. So it is an energy field. So what happens is, for example, I see you because your vibrations are visually are low enough for us as humans to be able to bring into consciousness each other, right? But you think, for example, of dogs or other animals who are able to communicate at levels that we can't associate ourselves with. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's an energetic, it's a vibrational thing, it's a frequency thing. So we physically are able to communicate, see one another, because that energetic level is low enough for us to be physical emanations. But there's also the aspect of one another which people would call a level of intuitiveness or psychic level. We're also always communicating at that level with one another. So you get intuitive feelings about people. You meet people and you get a certain feel about them. But that's partly physical. But it's also a mental communication that's going on between people all of the time at a very, very subtle level. And that is energy as well. So this all comes out of the field of the unconscious mind. And the enlightened state is being in that state where it is silence. There's silence. The mind is not going like this. And so a good meditation practice introduces us to that space and gives us a tool to be able to widen that space and deepen that space. And that gives rise to a happier life. Because things that bother us, we start seeing in a different way. Then we see that everything, nothing lasts forever. We think that with our problems, we imagine that they're all on top of us all of the time. Everything's going to happen in the immediate. And when we actually get into being able to meditate on that thing, which is one of the meditations in here, which is impermanence, we realize that nothing lasts forever. We may be going through a bad patch, or we may be going through a good patch. But it's not going to last. Doesn't mean it's going to be better, doesn't mean it's going to be worse, it's going to be different. We just have to take on board the fact that we are ever changing. That is the nature of life. We're forever changing. And if we try to cling on to what we consider to be those good things, we are actually resisting. It's like standing in a river that's got a current and constantly going against us, and eventually it'll pull us over. Go with the flow. That's what it is. Right? Are there any questions so far? Wow. That's very impressive.
When you talk about the space, it's like, as Deepak Chopra says, the gap. There's some,
it's the gap.
Similar,
It's the gap. The meditation, the idea is to create that gap. Where a good example of that is, when we are geared up that when something happens, we react like that, all the time. Whereas through meditation, the gap is where you say, hey, wait a minute. And you're able to look at the situation. There's some space there between you and the situation. And you can look at it from the different aspects, and you can look at it eventually in an unemotional way and decide how best to do it. Because, something comes into our minds, it's trouble. Answer it, got to get rid of it, boom, 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 got to get rid of it. But in fact, if we sit back and we say, okay, well look, there's a whole range of possibilities here, And we analyze those different possibilities, which we can do very well when we're in a space of meditation. We can look at the different options. We can decide which is the best option, the best solution to that particular problem. And we can answer it in a more effective way. Doesn't mean we're going to get it right all the time, but we'll get it right a hell of a lot more than when we try to answer things emotionally. Because the mere fact that we're trying to answer things emotionally means that we have a biased viewpoint, which is never accurate. It's always biased. It's biased based on our likes and dislikes, right? It's a judgmental thing, whereas if you live in the world of possibilities, now you've got possibilities and you've got probabilities, right? So anything is possible. Whether it's probable or not is a different story, but everything is possible. You know, things happen in our lives. We say, couldn't imagine in a million years that would happen, but it happened. Shows one. Everything is possible, so we have to be open for that. So non-attachment, impermanence is an important thing that we need to get our heads around. And non-attachment, which is grasping, where we're grasping all the time. We're grasping we're drawn to people or repelled, or people repel us, or whatever. We're grasping at concepts. We're going like this all the time. And that's another thing we need to slow down. And meditation is the foundation of that. So the whole thing with Patanjali is that it's a path to where an ordinary person, by following that path, can reach enlightenment. Will one? Perhaps. The odds are not great. It doesn't mean that because you follow Patanjali and you follow it faithfully, that you will become enlightened in this lifetime. What it will always do is you will constantly move ahead. So wherever you are today, you will be a better version of yourself. Whether you will reach enlightenment, it depends not only on your ability to practice, but there are karmic aspects to it as well, to do with those qualities that we are born with, as to whether we can, because you have to vanquish all karma, and that, in a way, the easiest is the part that we've been talking about now, which is the karma at this moment, which forms the basis of the next moment, which is the future. That karma is what I'm basically talking about. But then we've also got our past karma, and that is to do with the causes and conditions that we were subjected to from the moment of our birth. In fact, that we were actually subjected to them before our birth. And many of those are habits that we acquired in our very early life, from our parents, from our siblings, from our teachers, who meant well with us. But sometimes those things were not suitable for us, or we came from difficult conditions. But when we were very young, up to probably 5 years old, we didn't have the intellectual capacity to truly understand it. So we acquire these habits because they were given to us. And they may not have been very good habits. They may have been habits that our parents, let's say, had. They knew no different. They meant the best with us, for us, but they didn't know anything different. And so we've picked up those habits, and we find that we're not terribly happy about certain aspects of our lives. Meditation enables us to look at these different things. Now, it's not like psychiatry or psychology where people pick apart one's childhood as to why one does this and why one does that, and so on and so forth. The great thing about a practice such as this is you don't have to do any of that. It doesn't really matter. What's gone is gone. What we can do is we can lighten everything up. It doesn't matter what the actual thing is, but what we can do is change our attitude generally. Because the great thing about these practices is that we find out that we are all the same. There is no difference. In Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, right up front, tell us that the one common denominator of all of us is suffering. We all suffer, and none of us want to suffer. So the Buddha's saying, but this is the way forward to do something about it, right? That's what the practice is. So the common denominator is that we suffer. Now, it's not for somebody else to say whether that's the suffering that we have over a particular thing is justified or not justified. To one person it may be justified, to another person it's not. But it doesn't matter, because it's what we feel. And it's not that I'm suffering worse than somebody else, or about this issue and then, it doesn't matter. It is the act of suffering that we address, because we don't want to suffer. He doesn't talk about happiness. Because happiness, yeah, we all want to be happy, and we're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to be happy. Try. With suffering, we want to get out of it, and that is the motivator. And that's why the Buddha expressed it in terms of suffering as opposed to happiness, because we want to get away from it. We want a happy life. That's what we all want. Now, we're misguided in that we try all different things in order to obtain that. But the path is there, and there are many paths. But what I would say to you is whatever path you select, whether it's this or another one, there are certain fundamental components that are necessary. And when you find the path that is right for you, stick with it. That whole thing with spiritual shopping is a complete waste of time. It's no good. Where one tries something and it doesn't work out, so you try something and you keep going. Now, there are some practices that really are no good. But if you are discerning and you look at something that suits you and you find it and you feel better, because the whole key with the whole thing is if you don't feel better from it, it's not the right practice. It's either you're not learning it the right way, it's not taught to you properly, or the practice is no good. Because the object of the whole thing and the judgment of it is whether over time you feel better. Your life feels lighter. And that's what a good practice is. Any questions? Wow. Right. Now, I just want to mention, I'll start the pranayama with you in a moment. I was talking about karma a moment ago, about future karma, stopping that. But the past karma, in a way, is harder because it's become a habit. We build up these habits, mental and physical habits, and they affect our bodies because in terms of stress. So the older we get, the worse we get with it. We get more stressed. It's a good analogy is when we start off in life, we're born enlightened and we have no real stress. And then from the moment that we're born, the journey of moving away from enlightenment is what occurs. And we start off and we get a little bag that we're holding around, and it's got little bits of sand in it. And as we go through life, that bag becomes more like a sack, and the stones or the sand starts becoming like stones, and then it becomes like rocks. And we're carrying this along, and it's wearing us out. And we don't want that. And the manifestation of that is in the stress that we carry, which is in our minds, and as a reflection of our minds in our bodies. We find that that we have a lot of aches and pains that are stress related. Many diseases are stress related because we are by nature, our fundamental being is self-healing, homeostasis, which means that if you get rid of all of the stress, left to your own devices, the body will always try to find its own equilibrium. But it is stress that's stopping us from doing that. And because we all live in stressful circumstances, generally different levels, over time, our body is reacting towards it. So, in its simplest form, our muscles clench up. That affects our blood supply. That affects our nerves. So often we get sciatica. The sciatica may be nothing to do with our spinal column. It's our muscles that are contracting over our nerves over a long period of time. And our endocrine system is not working properly. This is what pranayama does. It's like putting, do you know Drano? Drano is a product. You know what a Drano is, everybody? It's a product that you use to clear drains, right? Pranayama clears the drains, if you like. It puts a push through your nervous system. It pushes your endocrine system. Your organs are invigorated. Your blood supply is invigorated, so that it gives us a kind of a vitality, and that helps our health. And so that, in a way, that effect helps us with our past karma. It all works together. If you look at Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga, there are 8 specific limbs, but it's not like you're supposed to learn, oh well, we'll do number 1 today, and perhaps we'll do a bit of 7. They all work together. It's a flow, and they all intermingle. So there's one that's pratyahara, which is withdrawal of the senses. Now, you don't actually have to practice pratyahara as a separate thing, because through doing a good meditation system, you are withdrawing the senses. So you don't need to do that as a separate thing. It happens automatically. So as a balanced thing, it will take you to all the 8 limbs of yoga. Now, I'm going to show you a simple pranayama. I'll show you the principles of pranayama. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask, not necessarily related to this, before we started? I do love questions, and nobody's
Meditation in action.
Huh?
Meditation in action.
Oh, well, I was going to come to that, but all right, we'll do that. I think what I'd rather do is I'll do that in the section of meditation. I want to talk about pranayama first, and then we'll talk a little bit about meditation.
I have a little question, Ronnie.
Pardon?
I have a little question.
Please.
Iyengar describes yama, or says the literal translation of yama is exercise. Is there any meaning to your slightly different, and any reasoning behind your slightly different wording around that?
Not really, and I must tell you that my background is primarily Buddhist, but exercise, it's a good description. Or you call it exercise, it's fine.
Yeah, because I find it very interesting, because as Iyengar describes, he says that asana is position,
Yeah.
and yama is exercise. So it's like quite the opposite way around to how a lot of people today are seeing yoga. And I think that's a really nice way to, I find that very powerful.
I think
Yama means more restrained. Are you
restraint.
saying yama?
Yeah, according to Iyengar, he says the literal translation is exercise, so exercise of prana.
Well, let me just say, he may well be right, but you see, many of these words are from Sanskrit, and they are not identically translatable in quite that way, right?
It's more like restrain,
Yeah.
and therefore set it free.
Yeah.
So it's like you
Exactly.
have a structure, you restrain, and therefore you expand, you set it free. So it's like
Yeah.
definition of.
You see, every teacher comes at it from a slightly different perspective. Now, Iyengar, for example, whose yoga, the asanas which he teaches are classic. He comes at it from very much a physical perspective. In other words, and this is a question of philosophy as to whether you believe the philosophy or not that is being used. There is a point of view that says that rather than get hung up on the absolute precision initially of how you do it, the most important thing is to slowly move towards it through an enjoyable experience. In other words, it's not about perfection. It is ultimately, but very few people are able to do the asanas perfectly. So Iyengar has a greater, let's say, physical spin on the practice than, say, Yogananda, who has very little physical spin on it. It doesn't mean you can't become enlightened if you don't do the asanas perfectly, right? The asanas you will find, for example, in the practice that I teach, so long as you do a small, balanced group that basically gives you enough physical movement, for this purpose it is enough. It's a question of inflection. I mean, I saw, for example, a video of Iyengar doing a breath control pranayama exercise, and the out breath went on forever. I mean, you could count it in probably 4 or 5 minutes, and there was a big audience there and everybody was applauding. And if that's how you get your jollies, great. I don't think that that's what it is. It's great if you can do that. I think that I think it's ego boosting if you're doing that for an audience, for an applause. And I don't think that it takes you any closer to enlightenment by doing it for that length of time as opposed to doing it for a lesser length of time. But within that, you will find a whole range of different views. Iyengar being one, and he has a very large group of following. And from a physical perspective of the asanas, if you want to learn them really, really well, it's a great way to learn the asanas. But it's not the only aspect of it. That's how I would categorize it. Many people would disagree with that, I must tell you. But from my own experience, I don't believe that that is the be-all and end-all of the practice. And yama is exactly as Laurie has described.
It's a funny thing, yeah, because the yama and niyamas in the beginning of the 8 limbs, they always say if you really don't practice the yamas and niyamas, even all the other limbs, you could be a miraculous master, and in the end you fall because the respect of the yamas and niyamas, of how you are with others, how your relationship with others and with yourself is not there, then
Exactly.
all the limbs don't flow, because you have the ego still involved in it. So you see great gurus who have fallen or have mistreated their powers and their shitty powers, and Patanjali as well, to warn anybody that if they, you achieve these shitties, you achieve these powers, and if your ego is more powerful, then you mistreat.
Absolutely. And that is a really important point, and that's why pranayama, in fact the practice, needs to be taught with the philosophy, because pranayama will energize you, but it doesn't direct that in terms of good or bad. It's just pure energizing. So you can get to the point where you have your energy really reinforced, but you are using it is actually boosting your ego. And that makes it even worse. And as Laurie has said, there have been many teachers, and not just teachers, others as well, that have that have the power but misuse it. Because what it does is it makes your ego even worse. The object of spiritual practice is not that.
The opposite of it.
It's the opposite. And that's why the philosophy is so important, right? That we understand, for example, I follow Tibetan Buddhism, and in that you always start off with your meditation with your motivation as to why you're doing it, right? Now the Tibetan Buddhist meditation motivation, the highest motivation, is the motivation is for to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, right? So it is purely altruistic. But the most important thing is, whether you use that as a motivation or whatever you use, that it is altruistic, that it is something that is not ego reinforcing, that has the effect of melting the ego, and that is through empathy. When we realize that we are the same as everybody else, we run into people all the time. Some of them are just nasty little shits. Now, if you look at it and you say, the guy's a nasty little shit, I'm going to react in a really negative way because of the way they're approaching me. That's our natural tendency. But if we look at it, and this is the Buddhist way of looking at it, and we say, look, the guy is just misguided. There's something, he's an unhappy son of a bitch. And something's happened in his life to make him that way. And so I'm not going to react to it. Quite the opposite. If I can, I'll help him. Because the view is that those sorts of people need more help. So you have to be compassionate. Compassion is a major component. And that's what you need. So that's why you can learn the practice, but you need to understand the philosophy to keep it altruistic, to keep it, otherwise you've got these people that are fundamentally sociopaths. They can be very, very clever. They can do all of this, but instead of using it in a compassionate way, they use it in an ego way to become more powerful and more oppressive. In other words, they see life as me and other. That is ego, right? In other words, there's me and there's you. And I'm looking at you external to myself. And if I have some element of power, I am using that I'm going to try and use you to some degree for my own benefit, whatever that may be. And you, likewise, will be doing the same. And that is how many conventional relationships exist. Whereas, if you look at it from the perspective of compassion, you're looking at we, not me and you. You're looking at we. I've been married for 39 years. That's because my wife and I have the capacity of seeing one another's point of view. We're not the same. We do not try to be the same. She's her, I'm me. We understand one another. The danger in, say, relationships is where we see our partners in a certain way, and we want to change them, which we never can do, but we think we can. And then we are disappointed if they don't perform in the way that we want them to. But that's judgment from my perspective, and it's a kind of arrogance, that one thinks that the other person, has to be reflective of me. What you can say is that you share similar values, but that you are basically independent people. And you have to respect that about everybody. So not just a relationship. So in a relationship, you have to have the capacity. It's got nothing to do initially with the other person. You as an individual have to have the capacity to sustain a relationship and try to find somebody else who likewise has the capacity in the broader context, nothing to do with you, to have a relationship. Because there are many, many people that are not capable of having relationships. And this practice makes one more empathetic to other people and understand them. There are certain people that are toxic, and you just want to stay away from them. You know, we probably all met toxic people, and we do not. You can try and convert them. I'm not big on the idea of converting people. With a group like this, I don't believe that you sell it. People come to you if they want to learn, but it's a bad dynamic if you try to sell to somebody a certain thing. There are certain people that are fundamentally toxic that have to reach a certain... They're either going to carry on that way, or an event will occur in their lives that will make them capitulate, but that's the way they are, and they're always going to be, probably. So to think any other way is just a way of walking into never-ending difficulties.
I guess that's the thing, isn't it? There's a difference between trying to help someone and trying to quite fix them.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
See, in Buddhism, it's about sowing seeds, and that's what we're doing here today. You know, I'm sowing seeds, giving you ideas, concepts. Now, your unconscious mind is picking those up. The less you try to understand them from a logical perspective, and that you just allow them to float through, believing that your consciousness will react to them in its own way, and will pick it all up. At a given time in the future, perhaps some of those seeds will activate in the way that they need to activate, because you then need the circumstances to germinate the seeds, which may occur. And that, you may think one day, I was at Ronnie Oppenheimer's thing, and that will not necessarily consciously quite that way, but it will maybe trigger you in a certain direction which will be helpful to you. So that's all one can do. And if people don't pick up on it, they don't pick up on it. It's not an evangelical thing. It doesn't, in my experiences, it doesn't work.
Well, it also puts gurus on the pedestals anyway, and it also allows other people to take advantage of us. And maybe that's just part of the journey as well, and that directs you back as well when you realise it's the failure of us not finding our own inner gurus, and that brings us up maybe by time back to the yamas and all that, because there's also, you should have empathy and be kind to people, but ahimsa is also going towards yourself. Shouldn't be all walked all over.
Exactly.
And sometimes when we use the asanas first, even the asanas has got all the yamas and yamas. You shouldn't, get attached to something that you're good at. You keep reverting back to that asana, and you shouldn't strive maybe to the ones you cannot do, because you shouldn't hurt yourself. So whatever way you sort of turn it, you've got to have to go back to the yamas and the yamas.
Yeah.
It's just that it's easier for most people to start jumping up and down in the mat, because our body is easier to control than mind. Then we revert back.
That's right.
That's my understanding anyway.
Yeah. Any more questions? All right, now I'm going to teach you the basics of pranayama. So, okay, now, pranayama, breath. The body, for this purpose, is divided first of all into left and right. Have you heard of the Ida and the Pingala? Yeah. They are, if you like, their energy. There's a left and a right energy flow. Now, they're not completely esoteric in that the vagus nerve is split into two, And the vagus nerve has plexes, and the plexes are associated, let's say, with the positions of the chakras, right? So one of a simpler way of looking at it is perhaps, although it's not entirely accurate, left and right brain, okay? They say that your right brain is creative and your left brain is logical. And that there is a conflict, if you like, going on between the two all of the time. Because you cannot, under normal circumstances, exercise both of those aspects because they are contradictory in a way, logic and creativity, right? Logic is a yes, no type of thing. Creativity is all-encompassing. And the spiritual aspect, yoga, follows the creative aspect, actually, more than anything. It follows what is art, music, theatre, that sort of thing. Now, what we endeavour to do is to balance these two, because the idea, and this is the principle under which pranayama works, is our spinal cord, our spinal column, has the spinal nerve within it. Some people would say that it is not the nerve itself, it's just the energy that's represented by the nerve. It's kind of, it doesn't really matter for this purpose, but call it the spinal nerve. The spinal nerve is activated by pranayama, right? And the prana, the life force, the energy, is forced, which normally is running about throughout our body. In other words, our left and right, the Ida and the Pingala, are not in balance and they are moving around doing their own thing. Now the object is to balance those two. And as a consequence of balancing those two, the pranic energy enters the spinal column, the spinal cord, from the bottom and rises through the chakras. Right? Now, each of the chakras, you all know about the chakras? Anybody not? Right, the chakras, there's there's six internally. Each of the chakras has a higher vibration, so it's a bit like you first of all have to equalize the energy, which is why you may have had some experience of alternate nostril breathing. That's what that is designed to do, to equate the two, equalize the Ida and the Pingala, so that you are breathing evenly through both the left and the right. For the purpose of this exercise, you can do it. So, all right. Or you can do same side, but the object is an awareness of the breath and being as evenly distributed left and right as possible. Now, it's not something we need to get hung up about, but if, for example, we have a catarrh or something like that, we are not breathing evenly. So it's an awareness of the breath entering both nostrils, reasonably evenly distributed, left, right. At the point where we are able to equalize them, the energy then enters the spine. I know for those that perhaps haven't got a background of this, it may sound a bit far-fetched, but believe me, it's not. And the energy is then drawn, and I say drawn, not pushed, drawn gently up the spinal column. Now, what happens? The energy is multiplied. The quantity of the energy is expanded through the breath, but the location is through the mind. So and this is what I'm going to teach you and we're going to do in a minute. As we bring the energy up, we bring it up by bringing our mind, our attention, to the base of the spine, and as we breathe in, we bring our mind to the lower chakra, we bring it up to the 6th chakra, to here, not the 7th, and we reverse it and bring it down again. And what that does is our mind, over time, energizes our spinal cord. And as it energizes our spinal cord, the energy is released in the form of what is called Kundalini. In Christianity, it's called the Holy Ghost. It's the same thing. But it is a concentration of energy that rises in that way. And it's very, very powerful. It's very healing. It cleans us out, but it needs to be done responsibly. And it's one of those things, and I'm going to actually go through it with you now. You need to do enough to get you going, but not too much that it gets you over-energized, because that's also not good. Over-energized means that you get very hot, you have a problem being, your mind is active when you want to go to sleep, for example, that's over-energized. That you're feeling generally antsy, you're overdoing it, then you need to just bring it down, and it's a balance. And that's a balance that you have to find for yourself. So you start off, and let's just deal with the breath part of it. We keep a little bit of restraint on our abdomen. So because what we want is we want our ribs, the floating ribs, to come out. Now, if we allow our abdomens to go out like that, we can't get the ribs out. So, all of you, put your hand on your abdomen, one hand on your abdomen, and one hand on your lower ribs on the side. Okay? Now, breathe in forget lungs for breathing for this purposes. We're talking about starting the breath from the base chakra, from the very, very bottom of our spine. So, what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in. We're going to hold a little bit of restraint to stop our stomach ballooning, and we're going to look to get our ribs out. So breathe. First, we always start on an out breath so that the lungs are empty. Now, breathe in. It takes a bit of doing. It's not something that happens necessarily immediately. You need to work at it. But the object is that you can actually feel your arm moving, that your ribs are coming out. You'll feel it. Raise your a bit higher. Yeah, that's better. This young man, you're not doing it?
Yeah, I've been practicing this.
Oh, you have. So you're all right with this.
I'm aware of.
Good. Okay, so there are three parts, if you like, to breathing. There's the abdominal aspect. There's the center part, which is what we're dealing with now. And then from there, we want to bring the breath right the way up, basically to our shoulders. So we start off out. Bring the abdomen in, if anything, a little bit. Force, well, not force, but you need to draw the breath up. It's not a matter of pushing, it's not an effort thing. It should be, there's always the counter restraint of the muscles that's trying to breathe out, but you just need to, it all needs to be gentle. All through the nose, and through both nostrils. And we bring it up to here. And then we just stop for a second, and then we breathe out. But we breathe out in a controlled way. We don't just let it all hang out. We don't just flop like a blancmange. We let it go slowly, 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 again back to the first chakra. And we always sit up straight. It is very important that our spinal column is straight and our shoulders are back. Posture is important. So, the breath. Now you breathe out. The out breath should be approximately double the length of the in breath. There are many systems that count. I don't think that it's the right way to go, because then you're thinking about counting and you're not thinking about what's going on. And it's more important to be thinking about what's going on than counting whether it's 7 in or 6 in and 12 out or whatever. Approximately 2 to 1 on the out breath, which is pretty automatic for us anyway. So when you breathe out, you get to the top, it's a stop, very short stop, and then you start breathing out. Stop. So that it's not a complete circle like this, but there's a stop to the in-breath and a stop to the out-breath. And whenever you stop, say you're stopping on the out-breath, you do a recovery breath. And then you're at rest. So that is the basic cycle. It's 3 parts. Now, the object, why the ribs need to come out, is because the diaphragm hangs from the lower ribs, and the diaphragm is actually moving. So it's as the ribs come out, the diaphragm is tightening. What it's doing is it's putting pressure on the organs below. As we reverse it, the diaphragm is going like this, and the organs are coming up, and that has an energetic effect. It moves the organs around. It's good for the endocrine system, for all the systems. Any questions on this? Right, so that is the mechanical part. Now, while we're doing that, and the most important part is this, in other words, it's not important that you get the technique of breathing absolutely right. The most important thing while you're doing that is, as you're breathing in, imagine an ember. Do we all know what an ember is? Yeah, an ember is, let's say, a light. It could be a piece of coal, a piece of wood that's burning. It's not the heat, it's more the ability to concentrate. A tiny light, let's just say, right? That's at the base of one's spine. And that light, with one's mind, as one's breathing in, one is raising that up the spinal column to the back of one's head and forward to the 6th chakra. And then as one breathes out, one is reversing that. So you're just identifying a light. Now you may find that as you do this, the point where you bring your attention, you will notice some kind of tingling or some kind of heat. That is what you are supposed to be getting to. That is the spinal cord becoming energized. And that's what we are trying to do. Okay? That is the basis of this type of pranayama. There are other kriyas that we could talk about, but this is the fundamental thing. The breath control is common to pretty much all the kriyas, although there are some that it's not. The actual method of breathing can be you can apply to other ones. But the key to learning it is the simplicity. You need to learn. It's no good like you were talking before about Iyengar. I've also got that book, and it's, I don't know, 200 pages, and it's really very heavy going. The key is to get the principle right, the way to breathe, and energizing the spinal column, the spinal cord. That's the essence of pranayama. There are other aspects of how you, having done that, where you direct the energy, but that is what you should be doing for 5 minutes every day as part of the practice. Right? As you get better at it, do 10. But you don't need more than 5 at the beginning. So that's all you do. And we're going to do that in a few moments. We then, having done ideally, by the way, you should do a minimum of sun salutations before the pranayama. That's the order. The asanas should always be done before the pranayama. The pranayama should always be done before the meditation. Okay? Julian will give us, take you through some sun salutations in a moment. Now let's just talk for a few moments about the meditation. Now I've told you the fundamentals of meditation. It's not really very difficult. The object is to get into the space of silence. And we do it with a mantra. And the mantra is I am. So this is how we do it. And we do maybe 10 minutes. It's not really necessary. You can do longer if you want. You can do 15, 20 minutes, but 10 minutes is certainly good when you start. So what you're actually doing is you are bringing your attention to the mantra, I am. Now, not I am or who am I, that kind of thing. It's just I am, I am. And you repeat the mantra, I am, I am, I am. Now, one's mind will have the tendency to goof off, unless one has got some practice with this, and then one can stay on the mantra for longer. So our minds will go off about whatever it would be. Have I overstayed my time on the parking? Or did I leave this on at home, or whatever? Every time we get to the point where we're goofing off from the mantra, we say in our minds, thinking, and come back to the mantra. I am, and you want to stay on the mantra. Why? The mantra is the space of the unconscious mind. It is the non-logical, non-ego mind in which the mantra resides. So you will find that, and you can't do both things at the same time. The mind does not have the capacity to do more than one thing at a time. It may appear that it does, but it doesn't. So you're doing the I am, I am, I am, I am, right? And we're going off, thinking, coming back. And we just do that. Now, over time, the amount of times that we goof off reduces. This is why I used the analogy before of the clouds and the sun. Because the clouds are the goofing off. The clouds are the thoughts that are over here. The I am space, which we become more aware of, is that space of the unconscious mind. And Vicky, you asked the right question one time about how do I know where I am? And that was a very good question, because the thinking part of the mind, that part of the mind has the association of being heavy, being contained, and making us generally not feel good. It's constantly, there's always a reaction. Following it, yeah. Busy. The I am space, if you want to call it that, let's call it that, the I am space has got a feeling of no limits. It's a space of silence where nothing is happening. It's a very pleasant, light feeling. And we become, over time, more associated with that and less associated with the thinking part of our minds. And that's what we want. So we make that transition very, very slowly, over time. And how do we know that we're progressing with it? It's that things that used to get us crazy don't get us quite as crazy anymore. Our friends say to us, you seem a lot happier these days, and you feel just generally a bit better. And that's how we know that it's starting to work, that we're feeling better. Because at the end of the day, what's this about? It's not about just doing some practice. It's the results that we're after of doing the practice. Otherwise, what's the point? So we're looking to feel better ourselves, feel lighter, enjoy our lives. And we will notice that by becoming more familiar with that space, we will identify that space as a space that we would like to spend more time in. And so we will start moving more into that space, right? So you can ask the question, well, I mean, if I'm all in that space, I mean, moving into that space, how do I function? Well, we do, because within that space of the unconscious mind, we still function. It's the only thing that we're not doing is having a lot of emotion attached to it. It's the emotion that's the problem. It's not that we are. It's the grasping. We lose the urge to grasp after all of that. So we're observing these things and interacting with those observations, and that happens in the I am space. Okay? And then the third part, we're running quite late here. The third part is, well, which is basically Yoga Nidra, and we're going to do something slightly different from what we usually do here. And that is this: you get to the meditation and you've opened up this space, right? And you say, oh, it's lovely, yeah, great. But the purpose of that is to use that space. Because having created it, that is the space in which we can actually deal with what is really the meditation. These things in here, where we can contemplate the sort of things. I'm sorry, what was your name?
Joe.
Joe. We can contemplate the sort of things that you were talking about before, right? We can contemplate non-attachment. We can contemplate who am I in that space, and we will not get emotionally attached. It's just a constant stream of consciousness going across, into which we are able to introduce certain concepts, float them out there, and see what comes back. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? And in that space, we start getting answers. And that is the space where we find that all these things to do with our childhood and so on and so forth start disappearing. Why am I this way? Why am I that way? Not like in a highly analytical, neurotic way. The object is to be able to look at it without raising the emotion at the same time. That's what the other part was showing us. How do we, once we're there, we want to use that space but not draw the emotion into it. We want to be able to look at it. Why do I react this way or that way? I was having a conversation a few years ago with a young lady, and she was telling me that she'd just come out of this rather abusive relationship with a young man. And then she went on to tell me that her relationship before that was also with an abusive guy, and her father had been abusive to her as well, physically or mentally. And I said to her, look, you've got to look at why you're allowing that, because what I'm trying to say is it's got nothing to do with the abusive situation, but we have the choice of allowing certain situations into our lives or not. And if we allow them, We are complicit in the action. We can't turn around and say, he was abusive, so, he's a bad guy. No, why did I allow that to happen? And that's the question we need to ask ourselves. Why? What is it within me? Why do I allow that to happen? In order to stop it happening again, so that we can understand ourselves. Not necessarily critically, but to understand why we attract certain types of relationships with people, perhaps, or we think in certain patterns, because that's equally addictive. We talk about addictions with alcohol and drugs and so on and so forth, but thinking is even more addictive, because we go down certain paths that take us to depression or anxiety or whatever, but they are equally, it's an addictive mental movement that is more disastrous in a way. We think of, somebody's alcoholic, it's more visual, it's more, we're more aware. But we're doing the same thing, it's the same mechanism that we do to ourselves mentally. And within that space, we are able to cure ourselves of these things over time. And what we realise is we are all fundamentally good people. There's no such thing as a bad person. We are misguided. In Buddhism, we would be described as ignorant, but that doesn't mean ignorant stupid. That means ignorant of how life really is, how things really work. That's all. So, before we go through the whole practice together, I'd just like to know if there are any other questions. No? Right. Okay, Julian, would you like to take us through some sun salutations? Are you all familiar with sun salutations, everybody here? If anybody doesn't quite know how, come forward and bring your... You can come forward and do it here, and just follow Julian.
Everyone's done, yeah?
Yeah, I haven't done any for a while.
Don't worry. Just to we've been sitting just to get the vote going again.
It's not about how well you're doing, it's just doing it.
Are you not going to join us, right?
No.
So come to the front of your mat. Feet together. Shoulders back and down. Tailbone tucked in. Arms by your side. And we're going to focus a little bit on the breath, yeah? So we're going to breathe in, bring the arms up. And as we come down, we breathe out. Come down. Bring the head up, breathe in. Right foot back. Breathe out. Followed by the left. And slowly down, keeping the elbows tight. Come up into cobra, breathe in. Legs down. Just take a few breaths here. Forward with the right leg, followed by the left, roll down, and as you come up, breathe in. And down. Okay.
looking up. Left foot back, and down. Brother. And down. Up into cobra, breathe in. It's downward dog. Couple of breaths here. Fingers spread out. Stepping forward with the left foot, followed by the right. Hang down. As you come up, breathe in. And out. Okay. Right side again, breathe in. Breathe in, looking up. Stepping back with the right foot, followed by the left. Slowly lowering yourself. Keep elbows tight to the body. Up in the cobra. Stepping forward with the right foot, followed by the left. Hang down. And breathe in as you come up. Okay. Last one on the left side. Breathe in. Couple of nice long breaths here. Stepping forward, followed by the right, down, breathe out. As you come up, breathe in, arms up, arch your back slightly, and out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so now we're going to do the pranayama, and then we're going to do the meditation, and after that we're going to do a type of yoga nidra. It's called a samyama actually. Okay. Remember, sit straight.
I just have one little question. How long will this take? Because if it's short, I don't need to support my knee. If it's long, I do.
Sorry?
How long will it take because if it's a very short, if it's relatively short, I don't need to have extra support for my knee, but if it's a little bit longer, I do.
For the pranayama,
Yeah,
we're going to do 5 minutes pranayama,
okay, I can do that.
and we're going to do 10 minutes meditation.
Okay, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, and I just need to know how much I need to support my knee. Please don't help.
Do you want a block?
I have a blanket, that's fine.
Yeah? You all right?
Yeah.
I need to be comfortable.
Everybody comfortable? Yeah, that's the most important thing, to be comfortable. Okay, you sit high, comfortably, shoulders back, head looking forward, not up. We're going to do 5 minutes of pranayama in the way that we talked about before. Okay, starting. Oh, one thing I just want to mention to you. On the out breath, those of you that are familiar with ujjayi breathing, you can do ujjayi breathing. Everybody familiar with that? If you're not, another time. It's not critical, but for those that are, do it.
The ember, is there any specific color to the ember?
No,
Because
whatever.
I started to get like,
Whatever you like.
okay.
It can be whatever you identify with. The main purpose of it is nothing to do with the ember. It's just that we concentrate our mind to a very specific spot, and we raise that spot, because the raising of that spot is what activates the mental aspect of it. Is what energizes the spinal cord. Okay, it's the actual mental thing, and that's why the meditation is important, because our ability to concentrate on that is very much dependent on how concentrated we can bring our minds, which is a factor of meditation. Okay, we all set? Any other questions before we start? Right, 5 minutes. Let's go. Breathe out. Put some energy into it. Let's hear you. Really breathe. only through the nose. Okay, last round. When you finish, open your eyes. Okay. Vicky, you need your head level. For meditation, it can be down a bit, but for pranayama it should be straight. Tat, you should be back a bit. Yeah. And I don't think you were quite... That's better. You're kind of moving a bit that way. It is important to get into a good habit of posture. I could see that you were getting a bit of kundalini going there in the back. Now we're going to do the meditation. We're going to do 10 minutes. Just the I am. We're all clear on that? Very simple. Nothing else. Okay? Oh, Julian, by the way, for the pranayama, use this mudra, not that. Right? Okay. So get ready. Abdominal breathing, all through the nose, just abdomen. Very gently, very slow. So there should be hardly any movement at all of the abdomen. We're going to do 10 minutes. Now, we're going to do samyama, which is similar to Yoga Nidra. The point about it is that you can do it yourselves, and you can do it from a seating position. In other words, you do not have to lie down as a continuation of meditation, because ideally Yoga Nidra anyway should be a continuation, should be an exact continuation of meditation. And because the meditation, the I am, takes you into that. Okay? So we're going to do it in the Yoga Nidra position, in the dead posture. Okay? But, as I say, you can, if you want to, do it in a seated position. So get yourselves ready. Anybody want a blanket? Now, I'm going to give you some words, but I want you just to bring into your attention, not focus on, just let them come and go into your consciousness and stay there for about 15 seconds. And we're going to do this twice. Abdominal breathing. Everybody nice and relaxed. Love. Radiance. Unity. Health. Strength. Abundance. Wisdom. inner sensuality. Akasha, lightness of air. Love. Radiance. Unity. Health. Strength. Abundance. Wisdom. Inner sensuality. Akasha, lightness of air. Now I want you to remain in that space until you hear the symbols. want you to take a deep breath. Move your head from side to side. Move your hands and your feet. Turn onto your right sides. And come up into the seated position. Now I just want to say one thing. I didn't deal with meditation in action, and I'm just going to say a couple of words about that. All meditation in action is that with the I am that we use, we can be walking down the street and an event will occur that causes us distress, where our mind is not as calm as we would like. Just do the same thing. Do the I am. Just go straight to the I am. When it goofs off, you say thinking, you come back. You do it in your daily life. Because meditation, the whole practice is about bringing it into our daily lives. That's what it's about. It's not sitting here and doing it and then forgetting it and going off. It's about bringing it into our lives, making our lives better. And meditation in action is very much about bringing it into our lives. So just use it on a daily basis. So, are there any questions? Okay.